You are about to listen to the full interview with Cynthia Kavanagh. Sections of it were originally included in our Legally Haunted House episode. Cynthia is the daughter of Helen Ackley, who owned the home and was involved in the lawsuit that went to the New York Supreme Court. Cynthia spent many years living in the home and shares her experiences with us. We hope you enjoy.
My name is Cynthia Kavanagh. I was born Cynthia Ackley, and I now live in Salem, Oregon. 30 years after the sale of the haunted house I lived in when I was in high school.
Can you tell us a little bit more about One Levetta Place? What was it like? Can you describe what it looked like?
When we first moved in, it was just, let's put it this way. To begin with, my dad had always been a house flipper before you flipped houses. He usually, due to the fact that we moved around a lot since he worked for Martin Marietta, that usually gave him about enough time to go in, find a nice house, add on to it in some way or another, and then we'd move on again. So when we went into this one, it was like, oh, we know what we're doing for the next umpteen years.
How many years were you in that house?
I personally lived there twice, for 4 years the first time, all through my high school years, 9th grade through 12th grade. But my mother lived there for about 25 years.
Wow, 25. What was it like spending your high school years in One Levetta Place?
It was mostly learning a lot of refinishing skills and basically, going to high school and hanging with my friends and things like that. And never made it a secret that we all my brothers and my sister and my folks all thought the house was haunted. So my friends, depending on how much they believed or disbelieved in ghosts, just kind of like, okay, that's what you think. That's what you think. So I never got ridiculed for living in a haunted house, but as far as I know, nobody was ever scared away from coming over after school and things like that.
When did you first discover that the house was haunted?
Well, my mom was the first one to be told by an outsider that it was haunted, and it was from a group of kids that lived across the street from us. The family my mother and father became really good friends with their mother and father, the Owslers, and so they were playing more or less in their front yard, and we shared a common yard that basically went down the end of the street. If you went clear down the end of the street, you'd end up in the Hudson if you kept going straight. And it was a kind of a clear field, and they were out there, and my mom was outside one day, and the kids kind of looked around at her, and they go, "Do you live here now?" And it's typical kid questions, and she goes, yes, we're moving in. And you got kids? Yes, we have 4 kids, but they're not here yet. They still live in Maryland. And she said, you want to come in and look around? And a couple of them said, sure, let's go. And a couple of them said, no, that's okay. And the ones that said sure said, they think the place is haunted. They won't go in. And my mom was never sure if it was because the house had sat vacant in front of their house for 7 years. Nobody had gone into it, which was kind of my father always thought it was a strange phenomenon because it was right there on the Hudson, and there were always people going up and down, walking up and down the riverbanks, and in the age of hippies and kind of wandering spirits. And the house had never been vandalized. In the whole 7 years, it sat empty. The only problems that were there were inherited because of a house that had sat with no maintenance, not because people had gone in and broken windows or graffitied the walls or anything like that. So that in and of itself was kind of like the house was more or less sending out vibes that, if you don't want to respect me, I'm not going to respect you. You can just move on.
Did you ever see a ghost, and who was the first person in your family to see one?
Probably my mom was the first one to see one. I had seen one on several occasions, and when I was in high school. I will also add to the fact that I also lived in the house from my late 30s until I moved out here into Oregon. After my first husband passed, I brought my children back to New York to live with her for about three and a half years. So I've had it on both sides of late adolescence and also middle-aged, living in a haunted house, the haunted house.
Could you tell me a little bit more about the first time your mom told you she had seen a ghost?
She basically said that she'd heard footsteps. One of the things that always baffled her is none of the tradespeople that my father actually had come in. We did a lot of the work ourselves, the do-it-yourself part of it, but he did hire plumbers and electricians and things like that, so he was always in compliance with codes. And they wouldn't stay in the house when nobody else was in the house. Because as one of the plumbers said, nope, I spend too much time running up and downstairs seeing who else is in the house with me. And my mom was telling us this one evening, and she asked us, well, has anybody else heard anything? And she said, because I never worry about house. It's old, it's creaky, and I just feel like there's people looking out for us. And most of my sister and my brothers mostly agreed with her that no, nothing really scared you into running to another room. But the first encounter I had with that kind of sensation came with me. The first room I had chosen, which later turned into the family dining room / TV room because of the way do-it-yourself projects work. I was sitting on my bed reading, and like I said, the house was old enough that it did have electricity, but kind of strangely wired, and it was a light in the middle of the room was on a pull chain rather than a light switch. And I looked up, and the pull chain, which had a large crystal marble at the end of it, was swinging back and forth. But instead of swinging back and forth in a complete arc, like somebody had been rolling around on the floor upstairs, which wouldn't have been uncommon because it was my brother's room, but it was swinging out as though somebody was standing right under it, flicking it away from them, and then waiting for it to come back to center and then flicking it back. And I kind of went downstairs very quickly and go, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but my light chain is moving. And everybody traipsed back up there, and by then it had stopped. It was dead still in the middle of the room. Like I said, that was my first pick for a bedroom, but then when things got changed around and we really needed to gut the downstairs kitchen, that particular room I was sleeping in had a very tiny kitchenette in it. So my dad made the decision to make that into our dining room kitchen while the main floor kitchen was being redone. And he saw it over the dining room table do the exact same thing. But nobody else was in the room with him.
Did these experiences become normal?
Pretty much. That wasn't the first experience my dad had with hearing things, or he had actually lived in the house probably about 6 weeks before we as a family moved in together. And being an old house, about every other doorway had a transom over it, an operational transom for ventilation and things like that in the heat. And his and Mom's bedroom had one, which meant if the hall light was left on, it would shine straight in. And my dad had always been the darker the better, the more restful night's sleep. And the first night my mom moved in with him, she started to get into bed, and she got back up, and he's going, "Where are you going?" And she goes, "To turn off the light in the hall, naturally. It's coming right in the window over there, right?" And he goes, "Never mind." And she goes, "What do you mean, never mind?" He goes, "I don't want to talk about it." And that was the end of their discussion.
Do you think that he was freaked out by it?
Yes, had been. He never totally described what happened to him the few weeks before we moved in, but when he found out that the rest of us weren't upset at all about it, he wasn't upset. So it then became one of his topics of conversation as the years went on, and we received more visitors. And at dinner time, he'd ask, "Well, how'd you guys sleep last night? Did you have any unusual things happen?" And a lot of times people would, "No, it was very nice." Or one cousin, it was my mom's cousin, so he's just about 6 or 8 years younger than she was. And he said, "Well, I kept going down the hall trying to find where the kids were that weren't in bed, because I kept hearing people talking, and we were all supposed to be going to bed, and they should have been in bed an hour ago, and I never found anybody." That was the first that I knew of from an outside source, was when my cousin Alf heard voices in the hallways.
Did you ever invite a psychic or do any search on the history of the house to find out maybe what was causing the hauntings?
For the most part, no, because it wasn't as easy to search back in the 60s and early 70s. The only research we had on the house came from a man that lived off and on next door to us. His aunts lived next door, actually, and but he was the grandson of the man that built the house.
Interesting. What did he say?
And he never admitted that there was ever any hauntings when he was a kid. He wasn't there all the time because, like I said, he was the grandson, but so he would go in the summer times and visit with his grandfather and family up on the Hudson. His only comment to my folks was, "Well, I'm glad to see the house is back into the hands of somebody who can really appreciate all its attributes," or something along those lines. But it took him about, I think I was a senior in high school when I first heard him talking to my dad about it. So it took him about 3 years to get comfortable enough with the fact that we weren't freaked out with what was going on to actually talk to my dad one way or the other about the house. But you had asked earlier, had I ever seen my own personal ghost, and I had. I've seen her about 3 times over the course of my living there, and only one time did I actually come face to face with her. And it was one evening I was staying up very, very late and watching something on TV, I'm sure, and went to go. There is a sun porch that has French doors from 2 rooms, off of 2 separate rooms into the house. One of which, as I said, was our upstairs had been dining room. It was later turned into a TV room, kitchen, and then my bedroom. So I went around to make sure that the French doors were locked, because they had a habit of popping open unexpectedly when nobody else was around. And I made sure the TV room doors were closed and went in to go into my bedroom. The French doors had long, clear glass in it. And I looked in, and there was a woman all dressed in white sitting on the edge of my bed looking into where my dresser mirror was, brushing her hair, and she turned and looked at me and kind of nodded to me, and I just nodded back and went back into the TV room and got a glass of water and sat there for a few minutes, and then kind of out loud I said, I think I need to go to bed now, and went back in using the hallway door rather than the French door, and nobody was in there then, so I just went to bed.
You saw that spirit 2 more times. You called her your ghost. Is there a reason you called her your ghost? Did other people in the family have their spirit?
Well, my mother had seen a gentleman. I saw her 3 times while I was in high school, but mostly from behind, like she was walking away from me the other 2 times. Only once did I see her face to face. And then before we moved out here, my current husband and I, we weren't even in the same room, but he saw her. He described her the exact same way as I described her. And I go, oh, you saw my ghost. And he goes, I don't want to talk about it. But when he'd first seen her, he heard her come up the stairs. He heard something come up the stairs. And we'd had the door propped open because it was warm. And on the 3rd floor, it got very warm in the summertime. And something could creak across the floor and sat down on the bed. And he opened his eyes and he saw a blonde woman sitting there staring at him. And she just kind of smiled and nodded and then got up, walked back out, and he rolled over and started shaking me, going, Sin, wake up, wake up. And because I'm sound asleep right next to him, I didn't hear a thing. And I go, what? He goes, I think I saw her. And I go, saw who? I don't know. She was blonde. I said, oh, you saw my ghost. Go back to sleep. And then he goes, okay, I don't want to talk about it. That's why I've always referred to her as my ghost, is like she was always keeping an eye on me. My mother saw a gentleman in almost pre-revolutionary clothes, and my father saw the foot of somebody wearing a moccasin as he was starting up the basement stairs. It was kind of looked like they were about 15 feet in front of him, and as he went through the doorway and looked up the stairs, he saw a moccasin foot walking away down the hall.
How did your parents feel about it being haunted? Were they afraid, comforted?
None of us were really afraid. We saw, startled with the way things would pop up and disappear and people would be around. But I think only once did my mom have any fear. Even when she saw the man sitting in midair, she wasn't afraid of him. She just startled her. But only once in the very late evening, she was in the dining room looking out over the Hudson, and she got this feeling of cold next to her, standing there, and she told me, she said, I'm not sure why I started talking out loud to myself, but I did. And I go, oh, it's a beautiful night, or something like that. I'm really always feel so peaceful standing here looking out over the beauty of this house. And the dread part that she had first felt kind of slowly vanished. And that was the only time that she ever felt alone. My dad was out of town, and us kids were all in bed asleep. And she said that was the only time that she ever felt like somebody was angry that she was there, or was kind of, I don't know, looking to provoke her. Yeah, but for the most part, everything was always, even, like I said, all through the years, even when after my dad died, she always felt like, and my youngest brother was the only one quasi at home. My sister was in college, and I was living in Texas. I think my brother was living in Kansas. My brother, just younger than me, in Kansas. And my youngest brother was getting ready to go to college, but Mom, we kind of all worried, well, are you going to be okay all by yourself? And she goes, I'm never all by myself. I always feel fine in this house, so don't worry. So she lived another 15 years in the house, more or less alone.
What was your mom like just as a person?
She always had a look on the bright side attitude for most things, most of the time. Looking back, it's like she was never upset with having to pack everything back up into boxes every 3 to 5 years and move off into a different direction. Sometimes we went places that she didn't really want to go, but she always made the best of where we were. The one time I can remember she didn't really want to go, we had just finished, and it was mostly my father, my mother, and my brother George had just finished the renovations on a farmhouse that they had bought in Maryland, and we had just moved in, and she was getting settled there, and my dad's company, out of the blue, made him move to Colorado. So that was probably her least favorite move of all, but in the end, she learned how to ski, so she said, couldn't have been all bad. I did learn how to ski. So,
that's great. Colorado's beautiful.
Yeah, she did have problems with altitude sickness. That was, she always felt lightheaded when she was living there, but due to the fact that they were finally moving into some place that they had always talked about living on a piece of property with some acreage and some historic value and things like that, and she felt kind of robbed of the experience, mainly because they'd spent months and months making it habitable, and then 6 or 8 weeks later, we're gone again. So
back to the Lavetta house, she did a story with Reader's Digest about the home.
Right.
Why did she do that story? She was very public about it being haunted.
Right. And she wrote it in the mid-'70s. She always loved, even back in high school, she kept all her the poems that she wrote and the essays and things like that. She had lots of them, and she'd always wanted to be a creative writer. She, in fact, took several creative writing classes just to learn more about the craft itself. So I think one of the instructors that she was taking classes from had kind of mentioned, all right, you've learned several lessons here, and all of you are getting quite good at writing the stories. Now you need to start putting yourself out there. If you actually want to do this more than just learning how to journal for yourself, you have to learn how to face rejection, basically, in the long run. So you need to start submitting your essays and stories to different publications and see what it feels like when, it's not the class critiquing your work. So the first thing that came to mind was, the Reader's Digest, mainly because the couple that I told you about that lived across the street, Mr. Ausler, was one of the contributing editors for the Reader's Digest.
So she submitted it to him.
Actually, she did what it says to do. If you read the fine print on the Reader's Digest, and I'm sure it still says that, we're always looking for contributing stories. Send anything you think is interesting to blah, blah, address and such an editor. And she told Noelle, his wife and her best friend, I'm going to submit a story so that if Tony finds out about it, he'll know that I didn't go behind his back per se. I just didn't want any influence. So she submitted it through all the proper channels that any contributing person that wanted to get their work published, she did it that way. And when it came to the table, from what I've heard, he saw it and he basically goes, all right, I have to excuse myself for this particular reading because this woman is my neighbor. So he just left the room while they discussed it, the rest of the editing staff, as to its merit, and did they want it to put it in any one of the publications. And because Reader's Digest paid money to people, even for jokes and all things like that. So I think she got paid $1,000 or maybe $1,500 or so for the article. So that was her foray into I've submitted a piece of work into the universe to be judged by other people, and we'll see how it does. And her joke to herself was she was always afraid. She kept writing. She'd write all the time, but she never resubmitted anything else. She goes, well, I can say I've honestly been a published author and have never had anything rejected. So that gives you a sense of what her sense of humor was like.
What was the story like that she wrote for Reader's Digest?
It was basically telling how the kids told her about the haunted house. The craftspeople told her that they, as big men doing, heavy-duty jobs, didn't want to stay past the time everybody else left, and she put in several of the stories that had been told back and forth through the family and stuff like that.
When did she decide to sell the house? What was the process? Was it easy? Was it difficult?
Like I said, she stayed there for many, many years after my father passed, and she was kind of our backup for all of us kids. Like I said, my brother George moved in with her. He had been working overseas as a civil engineer in the Middle East for several years, and when he came back, he and his wife had quite a difficult divorce to start with. So he moved back in with Mom and went on to meet his now wife. My brother William was back and forth depending on what kind of jobs he's always been our vagabond brother. he was there. I was also there with my 3 children after my first husband. She was always there with a nice big house that lots of people could be in without tripping over everything. Because, if you have your typical 4-bedroom house, 3-bedroom house, and you move in, your daughter and 3 kids move back in, that makes for a kind of frayed nerves. But we didn't have that problem so much when, but the reason she wanted to sell is taxes. It was getting to the point that she knew the renovations, the restorations that my father had done, and we had tried to keep up, were getting to the point that it was a full-time job again. She wasn't up to it. She was then where I am now in life. I just had a knee replacement, and I'm trying to remodel my bathroom, and I'm going, why did I start this? It's like I could see where she was 30 years ago. She just, maybe painting some walls would have been okay, but actually getting down on the floor to rip up the carpeting in the bathroom, because, come to think of it, why would you put carpeting in the bathroom type of thing? So she knew that between the renovations that needed to be done and the taxes, it was just getting to a point where even with after the insurance policies that my dad left, and after she sold the farm in Maryland, she wasn't sure how much longer she had and wanted to make sure the assets she had would see her through to the end.
When she initially puts the house on the market, how quickly was there interest in it?
Oh, quite quickly. Both people that knew about the house and things that went on wanted to, and she was never shy about showing people through. But I can remember at the time she put the house on the market, I was living with her, with my children and my new husband, Mark, And so there was quite a lot of interest in the house, and the fact that it had been, when my dad remodeled it, he had made it so there was a kitchen on every floor so that it could be a mother-in-law type situation where people like we did could move in and you know, you could have your in-laws there or your children move back in, large extended families. Or I remember one time when Mom had people come through, this one young Jewish couple came in with one of their mothers. I'm not sure which one it was, but the older woman goes, "Well, at least you can cook kosher." How many kitchens in the house? And I had not thought of it like that, but to truly cook kosher, you got to separate your dishes and your cooking utensils and everything, one from the other.
Did you ever meet the Stambowskis?
I did once.
What was your first impression of them?
Oh, I was quite excited for Mom because she had told me that they had been through 2 or 3 times. So, and they were expecting their first child. So I was basically happy for Mom. I was getting ready to move out here to Oregon. Mark had just taken a job out here in Oregon, and I was really happy that I'm going, oh, well, at least this way, you and William can move to Florida. My brother and her he can get you down settled in Florida, and I won't have to worry about you packing up your house, 6 or 8 months from now after I've already moved to out to Oregon. And so we thought the timing was wonderful.
Now, was it a conscious decision to not share that the house was haunted, or was it a mistake, or did...
Actually, I remember her telling them kind of offhand. I don't think Mr. Ellis actually put anything out, but whether it was haunted or not, because like I said, a lot of people in Nyack especially have haunted houses. Mom's just was the first one to get notarized. Mrs. Dembowski had said something to the effect is, yes, this is going to be a beautiful place to raise our family. And my mom's comment was, something to the effect of, I'm sure the ghosts will really love having young children here. And that was the only time that I know she mentioned ghosts, and it was just an offhanded remark. And my 2 younger children were 5 and 8, so they had all grown up. Even my children grew up knowing there were ghosts in the house. So,
when did your mom first realize that something was going wrong with selling the house, with the process with the Stambowskis?
That I'm not sure of, because like I said, I had already moved out here, so that part of the story was never clear. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't made clear to her until after she had already packed up everything and had bought a house in Florida and was in the throes of a total move.
Would that be why your mom decided to take it to court? Basically, I know that he requested the down payment back because they wanted to withdraw their purchase.
Actually, it was not a down payment. It was what was called earnest money. And I don't know if New York has changed their laws since then, but earnest money, from what I was told, was different than what most of the rest of the world or the financial world thought of it as a down payment. Most of the time, down payments are considered fully refundable within a specified legal time, and 7 working days, 30 working days, whatever. At the time, earnest money was was not necessarily refundable, and it was to guarantee that I'm giving you this money because I am so earnest about buying this house that nothing's going to stop me. And that's why she let it go to court. and refused to refund the money was because it was earnest money, and if you had any doubts about it, why did you wait so long before you told me?
He had felt that the house was very well publicized as being haunted and that it could devalue the house for future buyers. Did your family feel that way, or did you actually think that it added value?
We didn't feel one way or the other. It was just a fact of life. So, and like I said, growing up when I was in high school, we never hid the fact that we lived in a haunted house, or the story came out. So that was in the 60s. The story came out in Reader's Digest in the mid 70s. So by the early 90s, it was pretty much taking it for granted that, yeah, there's lots of haunted houses in this village. We just live with it. And it wasn't until Mom went to court that it actually became the legally haunted house.
How was the trial for your mom? The first trial ended up with them siding with your mom based on the concept of buyers beware. How was the trial for her, and how did you feel after that ruling?
Well, like I said, I was living out here, but and the fact that I knew that it was earnest money, not a down payment, and they had lived, with the knowledge they were moving in for longer than the period of time any contract would give them for grace period, I was kind of, like, okay, Mom, you don't have to return the money. Don't worry about it. And then when they decided to pursue it even further on up to the New York Supreme Court, it kind of surprised me. It's like, well, you kind of knew what you were getting into when you were told that by the first court that it's buyer beware and was no damage done. Your reputation wasn't harmed in any way. Your ability to move in wasn't harmed in any way. So why should you want to not move into the house?
I've seen so many pictures of it. It's really great.
It is.
What was the Supreme Court trial like? I imagine that's a pretty surreal situation to have your mom up at the Supreme Court of New York.
Again, I wasn't there. She and my brother went to actually went to that particular trial. I'm not sure if she even attended any of the proceedings for the undercourt. She just had a lawyer represent her, and so she did sit in court for the Supreme Court ruling, and she always took it as a win, even though she had to return half the money. She only had to return half the money. So again, the glass half full part of her came through, and it's like, well, they got me a little bit on the part where I couldn't guarantee there wasn't other tenants in the house, but then again, they couldn't prove there were. So I'm happy. That's the way she looked at it.
One of the things that this court trial is really known for is having a very tongue-in-cheek ruling at the end of it, referencing who you're going to call and certain things like that. I mean, it's known as the Ghostbusters case. Since she got half the money back, did she actually appreciate that sense of humor? Or I could also see the flip side, somebody being offended by it being so flippant. But how did she feel about it?
She wasn't upset at all. She was, like I said, she said, well, at least I got to keep half of the earnest money because I was earnest with them. And, she was able to, not long after the court ruled in the favor of discontinuing the contract, she was able to turn around and resell it to somebody who swears there were, as far as I know, they only lived there a couple of 3 years, but they swear they never saw any signs of any hauntings, ghosts, or abnormal creakings in the house. So they weren't at all upset with living there, and had no problems turning around and selling the house for a profit from what they bought it for.
How did your mom feel about it being the first legally haunted house?
She was kind of proud that it was the first legally haunted house. She kind of took that as a sign that things are progressing in the world, that there are things out there that we know nothing about, and we shouldn't be so closed-minded as to think just because we don't know anything about it, we should fear it. So, because she never feared living there, she didn't think, and she'd admit that, yeah, ghost stories and, sometimes people have terrible problems with the supernatural, but if you go into it with a feeling that, things can be worked out, they usually can. Like when she felt the presence when she was looking out the dining room window. Talk it over. Things can work out in the long run.
Your mom passed away a few years ago, and my understanding is she's not buried far away from there. Why did you lay her to rest near Lavetta?
Because it was near where my dad was.
Mm-hmm.
They're together.
That's great. That's wonderful. Have you ever been back?
In fact, I was back just last Friday, a week ago Friday.
Why were you back there? How was it? What was it like?
Well, my husband and I had promised his mom a trip to Ireland for her birthday, which didn't happen. So we went back to see her and kind of stay with her. So we did some traveling through parts of New York that she'd never been before, even though she's a lifelong New Yorker. She'd never been up to Lake George and things like that. So one time when she had an appointment a week ago Friday, we dropped her off and Mark drove me over to the house, and it was the only time we were there, only day that we were there that it rained, and it was kind of drizzly and dark and on again, off again rainstorm. And we were standing outside the house, and I could see from a couple of angles some of the work they'd done, and it was looking really, really nice from the outside. And about the time we were getting back in the car, we could hear a gentleman speaking, and Mark says, "Oh, I think someone's out on the back, on the deck, around on the side." So, and about that time, his little dogs come running up to the front gate, barking at us, and it's like, "Hi, sweetie." I love dogs. And the gentleman comes around, and he has a cell phone in his hand, so he's kind of like my husband. When he's on a phone call, he paces. So he looks at us, and he goes, "Can I help you?" And I go, "Oh, I'm sorry, no, we're just leaving." And he goes, "And you are?" And just as I introduced myself, I go, "I'm Cynthia." And my husband said, "She used to live here." And he goes, "Oh, you're the infamous Cynthia Ackley, huh?" So I have a reputation I didn't even know I had.
How did you feel about that?
It kind of amused me because I didn't know I was infamous. But I said, "Yeah, I did used to live here, but, just go back to your phone call. I'm sure, this is Friday, you're working. I'm just taking a look at the place," and we got back in the car and left. They have done over the years, they've added things that my dad never got to, like there was never a railing around the outside of this large wraparound porch, and one of the past owners had put a very beautiful, very in keeping with the house, and that was one of the stories that the gentleman that lived next door had told us, was there had been no railing on the house even when it was built. And my dad asked Scott why, and Scott looks at he goes, "You see all those bushes down there?" And my mom goes, "Yeah, the barberry, it's kind of something I want to get rid of." He goes, "Yeah, my grandpa planted those. He figures if you were stupid enough to stand that close to the edge of the porch and fall off, you deserve to remember it." And in one side of the house, it was a good 4.5 foot drop down off the porch. but he didn't want anything spoiling his view of the river, so he never put a railing around the porch.
Did you see or feel any spirits when you went back?
No, not this time. I do know that when we were at the memorial, Noel and Tony Ausler had hosted the memorial for us after the church service for my mom's funeral. And my sister's boy took pictures of the house. And this was back in the early 2000s, so he had a camera with film, not a digital camera. And she got the photographs developed. And in two windows that look out the front towards the Ausler's house, you can see handprints and faces looking out the glass. It's kind of hard to see if you can't make out any features or anything like there's a real person standing there. You can just see shadows of hands and so, yeah.
How did you feel seeing that picture?
It's kind of a mixed blessing of a feeling towards it. It's like, well, it looks like everybody showed up to say goodbye to her, but is she gone in to live with them, or did she go on to other places? And it's one of those things that you kind of ponder and can never find the answer.
That's a great place to wrap things up. Do you have any last thoughts about your time at Lavetta or the court case or your mom or anything?
It was just something that I lived, and I enjoyed living there at both times I lived there, and wouldn't trade those parts of my life for anything. Some of them was hard. When the reason I moved back in with Mom was hard, but, things still worked out for the very best in the long run. So I've never had anything but fond memories of living there. I wasn't so fond moving in because I didn't want to leave my friends again, but when I was in high school. But, as far as knowing it's there and still being taken care of in such a fine manner as going on now, it's like whether the people that live there or not have ever had any experiences, I don't know. But, maybe someday somebody else will.
Let us know if you would buy a haunted house on Twitter and Instagram at @strange_phenom and on Facebook at Strange Phenomenon, all one word. Please give us a review and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app. Visit www.strange-phenomenon.com for a full list of sources and more episodes. Strange Phenomenon is hosted by Ray Tarara. It's written and produced by RJ Blake and Ray Tarara. Theme music by Tara Monk. Additional music provided by Sergei Cheremizanov.